I'm back out on my local trails, and I'm just about to drop in with one very specific goal in mind today, and that is to figure out whether or not my full suspension bike is faster than my hardtail on my local trails.
Case study does science!
I have to admit to being a little skeptical. Is it even a sure thing that a full suspension mountain bike is going to be faster? There are certain situations where, of course, I can imagine that the answer must be yes. But what about on the blue trails that dominate my city? It's all a combination of flowy single track, and it oscillates between rooty chunk and fast hardpack, which is all tied together by equal parts climbing and descending. For years, my hardtail was my weapon of choice for these trails. I mean, in truth, it was my only weapon, which is why I'm uniquely positioned to tackle answering this question. With only a handful of rides on my full suspension bike under my belt, I'm as new to riding a full suspension bike as someone could be.
That could be part of it too, riding everything in medium.
Add to that the fact that I PR'd every single one of my local trails on my last hardtail ride, and the timing is perfect.
Well, hopefully that's a PR.
To keep things consistent, I used the same warm-up that I did on my PR hardtail ride. I started on Earthshaker, and after riding the track front to back, I sessioned the 3 main corners. My focus was on feeling out body position, getting my vision dialed in, and making sure that I was angulating the bike. After that all felt better, I headed back to the start line and dropped in for the first timed run.
Science!
My time to beat on Earthshaker was 2 minutes and 25 seconds. My final time, 2 minutes and 16 seconds. That's a 9-second improvement. That's 6.3% faster. Now I realize what I'm about to say is a false equivalency, but I spent 3 months last year training like a maniac for a 3% speed boost. All I had to do, turns out, was spend a couple of grand, and it got me twice that result. Now, I had mentioned that I had some assumptions about where the full squish would be faster, and I fully intend to find out where that is. So let's take a look at my hardtail run and see exactly where I gained so much time. Right out of the gate, I made up almost a whole second on this Rudy entry, and it should come as no surprise. The suspension not only allows the rear axle to get out of the way of chunk, but it also helps the rider to pump the backside of those roots, rocks, and small rollers passively. It's a monumental improvement in the technology of this bike over my hardtail. Next is the first of the 3 warm-up corners. It's easy to assume that the practice I had done would have given me an unfair advantage on those corners, but in fact, that couldn't be further from the truth. On this first turn, I actually lost time on the full suspension bike over the hardtail, a total of 5 milliseconds. Now, in spite of being slower through this one descent, one thing is clear, and that's that the full suspension bike does carry its speed better, meaning that in sections where I can manage to stay off the brakes, I do have an easier time initiating the climbs that follow and maintaining my speed through those climbs. Unfortunately, this isn't necessarily a result of having suspension so much as an overall improvement to component performance. These wheels maybe have less friction in the bearings. Maybe the tires have less rolling resistance. Maybe there's less rotational mass. There's all these small little factors that go into improving performance here. So while I literally did buy myself time here, I can't really say that it was a result of having a rear suspension. Now, as we get deeper into these climbs and into the more pedally sections, this is where things become much less clear. And unfortunately, most of my time was made up in these sections. Ultimately, this just suggests that I was putting more effort into the flats. And since I don't have a power meter, I can't say for certain if the speed came from my bike or from my legs. But what we can do is take a look at this table. The green column here is the difference between my 2 runs in seconds. And as you can see, there are consistent marginal gains with the one exception. But if we take the climbs and the pedally sections out, I still end up 2.5 seconds better. Which, I mean, doesn't quite represent the same impressive scale of improvement, but it is still an improvement, and one that I think we can actually directly associate with the performance of the bike over the performance of the rider. Fortunately, this wasn't the only course that I ran this day, so let's take a look at the next one and see what we get. The other trail that I wanted to look at is one just further down the road called the Trap.
Okay, but I guess technically I'm on a PR run here, so I need to smarten up and just push.
Well, maybe to no one's surprise, with the Trap I ended up in a very similar situation to that of Earthshaker. I'm covering a lot more ground when I'm hard on the pedals, which probably just means that I'm working harder. But it also tells me one other thing, and that's that I'm truly inspired to pedal this bike
Just swallowed a bug, so
hard.
I pretty much completely f***ed that line.
It's incredibly responsive, and as a result, it begs to be pushed that little bit harder. And while that may be difficult to measure, it's still an important characteristic. So maybe the full suspension has some secret sauce that inspires me to push that little bit more. Or maybe its forgiving nature allows me to sneak in a few extra cranks when I might otherwise just coast along over some milder chop. Regardless, even in just the descending, there are definitely still improvements. If, like the last trail, I remove the climbing segments and flat pedally bits from the times, I still come out 2 seconds faster. And that is something that can't easily be tied to additional effort. Sure, I'm carrying a bit more speed into the descents, but not enough to account for the entirety of the difference. Now, the time to beat here for me was 2 minutes and 40 seconds. My final time, 2 minutes, 33 seconds. A 7-second improvement, 4.4% faster. So, will a full suspension bike make you faster? I have to say, while I honestly didn't think that it would, it clearly did. At least in my case. In addition to these 2 trails, I rode half a dozen more on this ride, and those I just rode at my normal riding pace. And even still, I managed to PR most of them, which really just solidifies in my mind how much time there is to gain on the trail from your parts, your frame geo, and maybe just that little bit more confidence that a bike like a full suspension can give you. But more than is it faster, the important question is, do we actually care? And I don't say that just to be inflammatory. I say that because even if I wasn't faster, my full suspension bike rips. It's more capable, it's more forgiving, and it's more fun than my last hardtail. And while I did indeed PR these trails, riding is about a hell of a lot more than just going the fastest. That said, if you do want to go the fastest, I think the takeaway here should be that the key is always going to be to pair the right bike with your strengths and your trails. This bike strikes the balance between riding fast-ish while still letting you have a lot of fun, which means it simply won't be as fast as an XC bike, in the same way that it won't descend like a DH bike. But those limitations are what make these bikes so special. For better or worse, they have character, personality. And for me, getting to know my bike, regardless of whether it's a full suspension or a hardtail, is half the fun. This has been Case Study Does Science, and I hope you enjoyed the show. We'll see you next time.